Okay, it's about that time. Let's kick it off. Let's dig in. Gaining confidence with Cypress tests. Here's the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post my slides on my site tonight. You'll go look at my site tonight, tomorrow, next week, next month. In about 3 months, you'll get tired of endlessly pushing refresh and you'll email me. I'll promptly reply in 6 months and say, no, I'll definitely post them on my site tonight. I've been that guy chasing the speaker for months on end to try and post the samples and demos and slides, and I don't like it either. So you can go to robrich.org right now, and you can click on presentations up here at the top, and here's Gaining Confidence with Cypress Tests. It is online right now. You can get at the slides that we're about to look at. You can get at the code that we're about to dig into. It is up on GitHub right now. While you're here at robrich.org, click on About Me, and you'll get to this slide that talks a little bit about some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm a friend of Redgate. AZ GiveCamp is really cool. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities who otherwise couldn't afford software services. We start building software for them Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software back to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp in your area, here in London or wherever you are, hit me up on email or on Twitter, and let's get philanthropy installed in your neighborhood as well. Some of the other things that I've done, I worked on the Gulp team as a core contributor in version 2 and version 3. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So there's my claim to fame, my coveted .NET Rocks mug. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks, no, I'm just kidding. So gaining confidence in Cypress tests. We talked about this guy. So I want to test to see if my site is working well. Let's dig into it and see if this demo will work. Oops. Let's do this. So I want to just quickly test my app. Now, in this case, I'm using To-Do MVC as my app of choice, but let's go grab all of the pieces. I visit a page, I create a to-do, I finish a to-do, I delete a to-do, I show active tasks, I show completed tasks, I clear tasks. I should have set my phone to stun. Okay, so it looks like my site is working. All of the pieces are running, and I have confidence that it will stay that way. That it works successfully because I've run all my tests and it behaves exactly like I expect. That is cool. So Cypress, it's browser-based functional tests. We saw how it was able to flex the site and validate all of the things that we needed to. We can talk about it instead as end-to-end tests. It's an Electron app runner and a browser plugin. It's built on top of Mocha and Chai. So, like many good stories, we started in the middle. Let's back up and start at the beginning. When we're looking at these end-to-end tests or these browser integration tests, how does this fit in context with other testing libraries? Let's take a step back and look at the entirety of browser testing. Well, we have different types of tests. We can test from here down, end-to-end tests. Or we can test this API. Maybe we're hitting a REST API or a GraphQL API. We can test this service. And by service, I mean a non-functional, a non-UI component. So let me explore this code and validate that it works. Maybe a unit test does this really well. test this component. Now I have some user experience type of things where I want to click buttons and I want to validate that this component works, but I don't necessarily need the dependencies, the inner components, or the services. So I may choose to mock those dependencies. And I want to test that this works in this browser. With HTML5, we've kind of gotten away from browsers making up their own things, but does this JavaScript blow up in that older version of this browser? These are kind of areas of places to test. I want to test in this browser. I want to test components. I want to test units. I want to test APIs. And I want to do end-to-end tests to validate everything works. There are different tools that fit into each of these categories. And I may choose each of these categories when I'm trying to test that particular thing. So for example, if I want to do a unit test, I'll choose Mocha or Mocha with Chai, or I'll choose Jest. And those are great choices for being able to do these unit tests. Unit test services in the browser. Karma is a really good way of hosting unit tests inside various browsers. So I can run it inside Chrome, I can run it inside Firefox, I can run it inside Edge, and I can validate my unit tests will run in each platform. If I'm looking for component tests, I'll spin up test utils. Test utils has a mechanism for both Angular, React, and Vue, and so I can start to host my components inside of a unit test. That will allow me to shallow render the component tree, for example, or push particular buttons and be able to validate that my components behave the way I expect. I'm still in unit test land. When I want to test an API, I probably don't need a browser at all. I can just fire requests at it. And at that point, Supertest is a perfect tool. Supertest allows me to hit this API with requests and validate that the response is what I need it to be. I'm looking at status codes, I'm looking at headers, I'm looking at body. I may deserialize that body using the mechanism that I need. Supertest is great for that, and I don't need a browser at all. For end-to-end tests, I have a lot of options. Selenium, Cypress, Test Cafe, Playwright. Let's double click into this end-to-end test and dig into each piece. Selenium. Selenium is really the big dog in this space, and it's the oldest of these techniques. Selenium and WebDriver have become standards and are baked into most browsers. I also have mechanisms for writing these tests in many languages and frameworks. There's also a plugin into Firefox where I can record my tests, where a non-technical user can just click through the application and record all those steps. Now, those aren't the best tests, but these are great options. On the downside, Selenium is a Java-based server, and it really can't integrate very well into the browser. At best, it is pushing buttons. Now, that's cool, but it also means that it can't, for example, wait for browser events. And so I do a lot of waiting inside Selenium tests. Let me wait another second. In Selenium tests, we might have fragile, brittle things where I didn't wait quite long enough this time. So now I'll wait 2 seconds or 3 seconds. Now my tests take a really long time to run, not because it took that long to do all the functionality, but because I didn't know how long it was going to take, so I had to wait a little bit longer each time. Selenium. Cypress takes a different approach. Cypress is a browser plugin that digs in deep into the particular browsers. Because of this, they need integration into each browser. And so right now we have Chrome and Firefox, but they're working on other ones as well, like Safari. Because I have deep integration into the browser, I can do things like waiting for documents. When this AJAX request finishes, then continue on with the rest of the test. There aren't sleeps or waits inside Cypress tests because I can just wait for this thing to happen. That makes my tests a whole lot faster and a whole lot less brittle. That is really cool. On the downside, Cypress has a jQuery-like API, And it has promises, but they don't quite work the way promises work in most instances. And so it feels a little weird. But Cypress has this great mechanism of recording videos and screenshots at various places if I choose to. And so I can watch a movie of my test run and see exactly where it failed and what it was doing at the time. That can be great when I'm running in a headless environment and the only result I got is, well, it didn't pass. That's cool. Cypress also just came out with Cypress Studio, and that is cool. Test Cafe. Test Cafe is powered by DevExpress. It has that similar browser plugin type of experience. It uses CSS selectors, so it probably feels a little bit more native when you're writing those selectors than Cypress. But it has a really odd assertion syntax, where Cypress is built on Mocha and Chai. Test Cafe is a unique thing unto itself. So you may find that assertion syntax is kind of weird. In Test Cafe, the tests don't run in the browser, but rather we marshal data back and forth between the browser and the test runtime environment. So there's interesting things like, well, let me run this code in the browser to be able to return that back to my test. Test Cafe is focused on running in all the browsers, and so you'll get great browser support for Test Cafe. Playwright. Playwright is a brand new one here on this list. It's sponsored by Microsoft and written by the developers who built Puppeteer. So like Puppeteer, it feels a lot like a Puppeteer-like experience. We have APIs in JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, C#, Go. They've really made it accessible, much like Selenium. And it feels a lot like Puppeteer. So if you're comfortable with Puppeteer, you can be really comfortable with Playwright. On the downside, Puppeteer wasn't meant to be a browser testing library, and Playwright kind of feels like assertions were bolted on at the end as well. It just feels weird. Similarly to Test Cafe, the test context and the browser context are different, so you may spend some time marshaling data back and forth between the browser and the test runner. Now, we did that in Puppeteer as well, so that may feel very natural if you're using Playwright. As you grab these slides from robrich.org, any of these blue links are links off to those sites where you can learn more about each of these technologies. Now, we dug into each of the technologies, Karma, Mocha, Chai, Playwright, Test Cafe, Cypress, and so we kind of understand where this fits in context. Now, I may not need all of these tools in a project, but I probably will use many of them. I'll use Supertest to test my API. I'll use Mocha and Chai or Jest to test my units. And then I'll hook them into test utils as I'm spinning up tests around my components. And when I want to do end-to-end tests, I will reach for Cypress. Let's talk about getting started with Cypress. What's really cool with getting started here is I just do an npm install and an npx cypress open, and I'm ready to go. The first time I run Cypress, it will scaffold out a lot of tests, and they call these the kitchen sink tests. It flexes a site up on the Cypress website that is specifically geared for being able to do this. Now that's great. We have lots of examples of things to do. We can go follow those examples about how to get started with Cypress and how to dig in. Just by installing Cypress, we will have those examples. Now, it may make sense to go delete those examples and start over, but they're great reference as you get started, so I tend to leave them around until I need to delete them. Let's dig in. So I've scaffolded out this project, and I've created this Cypress project inside of TypeScript. Here in my package.json, I have Cy open, which is that Cypress open, and that gives me access to this IDE. Now here in the Cypress IDE, I have a couple of really cool options. I can pick the browser that I want to run these tests in. Firefox, Edge, Chrome, or their built-in Electron app, which is based on Chromium. Now, once I've chosen my browser that I want to run in, I can choose to run all the tests, or instead I can choose to run a particular test. Here's all the examples that Cypress installs by default. So for example, I click on this test and up pops a brand new browser with a brand new session dug into my particular test. So now it's going to go run each of these tests and validate that my site works as expected. That is cool. With the Cypress IDE, I can get a really cool experience through my tests. Oh, it just finished compiling the TypeScript, so now it'll start the browser again. Down here on the left, I have that mechanism of running each test. On the right, I have the browser as it will render those tests. Now, in this case, my viewport is 1000 by 660, but I could choose to set this viewport inside my test as well. What's really cool is I can dig into each step of the test and it will show me what the page looked like at that step. So here, when I said get new to do, it shows me the box that it's selected. I'm going to grab the list of to-dos and it will show me those. I can click on this button, open the selector playground, and start to pick a particular thing, and it will help me identify what is the CSS selector that I need to get there. That's really cool. I can start to interact with the browser in interesting ways and understand how my test is built. I can also navigate forward and backward through time to be able to see the steps within my test. And as it pushes buttons, let's go to a button click. It will show me where it clicked on that button. There's that red dot. So this IDE is really cool in being able to help me discover the content that I need to add to the next test. The Cypress IDE. I think they did a really good job in letting me navigate through different browsers, let me navigate through my tests, be able to navigate forward and backward in time. And it's just a browser, so I can pop open the F12 developer tools and take a look at the console as well. Cypress and TypeScript. So in this case, rather than just taking the default, I modified this project a little bit to support TypeScript. So let's dig in. Cypress.json is our first stop in the Cypress configuration journey. Cypress.json is created automatically when I install Cypress. And the important part here is this plugins file. That's where it goes to get the rest of its configuration. Cypress plugins index. Now, by default, it will put it inside of a Cypress folder, but I wanted to put it inside test/Cypress so that I can put that alongside my unit tests. So here in this Cypress folder, let's go into plugins index. And here is the rest of the content of configuration. Now I'm creating this config object that says, here's where the rest of all of my pieces of Cypress are. I have my fixtures inside Cypress fixtures, my integration folder inside Cypress integration. That's where all my tests are. Screenshots, I'll put that in a results folder so that I can exclude results from my source control, my videos folder, my support file. And so all of these then end up in all of these other folders. So to do MVC, let's come back in here and, oh, I jumped the gun. Let's come back in here and we'll look at this test. Now, in this case, I've chosen to test the To-Do MVC website because what's cool about the To-Do MVC website is they've built a client-side SPA in lots of different languages. It's a little bit dated, but I can then flip between different implementations and get more or less the same experience. Because I'm doing end-to-end tests, I'm just focused on the visuals inside the browser, So to flip between, for example, the Angular and the Backbone and the Vue examples, I can just start with a different site URL. So my first test, sci.visit. I'm going to go to the page where I want this test to begin. Now I could choose to do the sci.visit at the beginning of each test, but here I'm choosing to do it in a before each so that I don't need to repeat it in each test. So before my test kicks off, I'll visit that site URL. Here's my hello world test. I'm going to go check to see if sci.url should equal site URL. Now this was great. As I was preparing for this talk, they had actually flipped it from HTTP to HTTPS, and this test was able to catch it really, really well. So straight away, I noticed that, my site isn't behaving the way I expect. So that's a great hello world test. Go visit the page and validate that that's the page that I got to. Okay, next up, let's start to interact with the page. Here's a test where I say sci.get. I want to go look into my to-do list and I want to go grab li items. I want to go grab all of the elements in my list. Now, I haven't built any to-dos yet, so this should not exist. Now, that's kind of cool. It kind of feels a little bit Mocha and Chai-esque, or maybe the Jest assertion libraries, but it also kind of has a flavor of its own that kind of feels a little jQuery-esque. .get this thing, that kind of feels like jQuery. .should not exist. That kind of feels Mocha and Chai, but well, instead of should not exist, I'm passing this as a string into should. Okay. Yeah, it's a little weird, but I can look past that. It's still quite cool. Okay, now I want to add a new to-do. Now here in this new to-do, I'm not just asserting things on the browser, but I also want to interact with it too. So I'm going to start by getting that new to-do, and then I'm going to .type into it. So I'm going to type my new to-do. Here's my new to-do that I'm setting in place there. And then I want to push the enter key. So curly brace, enter, curly brace is that mechanism for highlighting special keys. I can push F keys, I can push shift, I can push control. Any of those weird characters, I can just say curly brace and type it and curly brace, and now I've typed that interesting character. So I create a new to-do, and now let me go get that list again, and it should contain that text. So what's really cool there is if I've typed it correctly and if my site works, it ends up in this to-do list, and now I have a to-do. Additionally, I want to go look at that new to-do value and validate that now its value is empty. Cool. So as I add a to-do, I can type a new to-do, push enter, validate that it ends up in the list, and validate that my to-do entry is blank again. That's cool. Let's upgrade a little bit farther. Should mark a to-do as completed. Now here I want to type a to-do. I'm going to type some irrelevant to-do. I'm going to type my new to-do and push enter. And then I'm going to go grab my view for this particular to-do and go find the toggle button and click it. Now this contains is a really elegant mechanism to kind of dig into it and say, let me find the view item that contains this text. But that's a little weird. Really, I should probably put unique IDs here and be able to dig into that, or unique classes so that I don't need to do it. But if I haven't designed my site to be testable, I still can create Cypress tests for this. Even better, I might choose to put a data-cy attribute on each thing, and now I know that that is specific to a particular test, and I can select things based on that data-cy attribute. Okay, so I've gone and grabbed that to-do, and I found the toggle button, and I've clicked it. When I click that button, now I can go back to the to-do list, and I should have a class of completed on that particular to-do. That's cool. So I created a bunch of to-dos, and I validated that my to-do works as expected. Let's upgrade a little bit more. Should delete a to-do. Now, in this case, I need to do quite a bit more. I need to create a to-do, and then I need to find it, and then I need to delete it. So let's create some to-dos. I'm going to create an irrelevant one so that I make sure that I'm clicking the correct one. I'll create the new to-do. I'll go find that to-do, and I'm going to go find the .destroy button, and I'm going to click it. But there's a little bit of a problem here. That destroy button doesn't show up unless I do a CSS mouse over of that event. Now, Cypress doesn't support mouse over, and by default, it won't click things that aren't visible. So here, I have to give it the force true to say, yes, I really do want to click it, even though it isn't visible. Now, that's really cool. I went and found my destroy button. I clicked it. And now I'll go look for my to-dos, and my to-dos should have a length of 1. I should only have my irrelevant to-do left. And to that end, let me go look in there and validate that it's the irrelevant to-do, not the to-do that I thought I just deleted. Cool. We were able to click into things and click it even if it isn't visible. We were able to find things even if I didn't put a very descriptive ID on it to be able to find it. Let's upgrade again. Should show only active tasks. You know, I'm getting tired of this .get, .type, .get, .type. What am I doing? Am I creating a new to-do? Am I typing randomly on the page? Let's create a helper function that will allow me to create to-dos with a simple thing. I want to say cy.todoadd and pass in the new text for that to-do and have it go build that thing for me. Well, what are the steps that it needs to do? I'm going to come into support, and I'm going to come into commands, and I'm going to create this new command called todoadd. It's going to take in text, and it's going to do this. I'm going to type in that text, push enter, and I'm going to validate that that text no longer appears in the box after I do so. That's cool. So now I can just say cy.todoadd, cy.todoadd. That's a lot more descriptive. That is wonderful. So now when I say cy.todoadd new to do, I know that that's the one that I really care about. I've made my tests much more legible by creating these small reusable commands that do interesting things. Now, because I'm using TypeScript, I not only define the command inside of Cypress, but I also need to come back into TypeScript and tell TypeScript that this method exists. So I have a todoadd method that takes in a string and returns this chainable element. With this TypeScript definition, now in my to-do MVC, then yeah, my TypeScript knows what cy.todoadd is and will help me by validating that I really do pass in a string. That is wonderful. I've also created a to-do complete method that does similar things. Let's dig into that to-do complete method. Here's to-do complete. I take in a string, and that's going to do that cy.contains.children toggle click. So that whole mechanism of kind of paving over the fact that I didn't make that sufficiently descriptive, that just handles this in a really elegant way. And now I can read my test and I completely understand what's going on. I'm going to add 3 to-dos. I'm going to complete the 1 to-do. And now let me get to the other part, which is I should only show active tasks. Now, maybe it makes sense for me to turn this into a command as well. At that point, my test is really, really legible. I'm using business terms to describe the techniques that I'm doing, and I'm putting the bulk of my test behind these commands that are reusable across tests. That's really helpful. So let me go find that active button. I will click it. And now my list of visible items should only have a length of 2. I created 3, I hid 1, and now I should only have 2 left. That's really cool. We saw how adding commands is really helpful in making our tests a whole lot more legible. Whenever we can build a reusable command, that makes it really, really helpful to dig in. Should show only completed tasks. We're going to use our helper methods here. That's really cool. Let's go complete a to-do. And now instead of choosing the active button, I'm going to choose the completed button. And now I should only show my completed item. That's perfect. And this test is now super legible because I know I'm creating 3 new to-dos, I'm completing one, I'm grabbing the completed button, and it just works out really well. That's cool. Should clear completed tasks. We're doing a similar thing, leveraging our helpers, grabbing .clear completed and clicking that. And now that I've cleared my completed tasks, I shouldn't have any tasks left in my list. Wonderful. If I pop open my test, I can now see each of those tests running inside the browser and being able to accomplish each of those steps. So I fire up my site. There's the TypeScript compile, which refreshes the site. I think that's kind of fun that it fires it up and then it does the TypeScript compile. Okay, so visit the page, validate that I get at that thing. I hit API and I don't have any to-dos saved previously, so that's fine. Should have no to-do items before we start, should add a to-do, should mark a to-do completed, should notice how fast these tests are running. When we don't need to wait a second or wait a minute, it's really, really cool to be able to cruise through these. And with each of these, I can see the various content in that test, and I can start to navigate through it. Now here, when I'm asking for the view of completed task, yeah, that's kind of messy. Let me actually inspect and let's load the console. And we can actually see the console from the test as well. And in the console, it will start to export really interesting things about our tests. And that is really, really cool. But I probably could create additional attributes on these elements that will allow me to pick them a lot simpler. A data-cy attribute is perfect. And at the point where I had a data-cy attribute, rather than saying, let me go find the button that says this, I could say cy.get data-cy equals completed dot click. Now there's two really elegant benefits to doing this way. I'm digging into a specific attribute that is geared for this test. And in my markup, I can very specifically identify these are the attributes that I will use for testing. It's very clear to other developers coming through this code that this attribute is for tests. Don't change the CSS class, don't change the ID. You know, those are interesting rules that help us guard in this sense, but being able to have that data-cy attribute is really powerful in locking down that this is an important piece that is specific to Cypress testing. Okay, let's upgrade to the next set of tests. Now, in this next set of tests, I'm using the Hacker News PWA. Hacker News PWA is kind of a spiritual successor to To-Do MVC. And there's various mechanisms of doing Hacker News readers in various platforms. So Preact and React and Svelte and Vue. And it's really cool to be able to create mechanisms for loading this Hacker News content. Now, if I fire up my test, let's close this test and come back to the Cypress test runner and open up the Hacker News PWA. Now, in this Hacker News PWA, we're going to fire up the Hacker News for Angular and be able to dig into the particulars of this application. Now, this is end-to-end testing, so we do want to validate that we can load news, but we may not necessarily know what the top news comment will be. or the top news story. So we can't do things like, well, does it contain the title? How can we handle that? Looks like all my tests passed. That's perfect. Let's look at the test. So I'm going to start off doing this sci.visit at the beginning of each test, and that will validate that, or that will go visit the page and get it loaded. So I don't need to duplicate this in each test. I could choose to duplicate it if I'm browsing to different pages throughout this test, but this test is very specific to this page. So I really like creating a describe block around a particular page and then flexing all of the portions of that page in one particular test. So I'll do that sci.visit and get to that particular page. Should visit page. Let me validate that I got to the right page, and that's perfect. Whether I choose to do the Angular one or the Firebase one or the next one or the next one, I can flip between these apps and validate that I'm on the right page. Should have a specific top story. Now, when I load this page, it's going to go hit the API that needs to load the stories, and it will load whatever content is on Hacker News at the time. Well, how do I validate that it's rendering the story correctly? I really want to intercept this request. So in this case, I'm putting in a regular expression and thus all the backslashes, but I could also put in just a regular string to say, this is the URL that I want to intercept. Now I am going to say I would like to access control allow origin because it is going to be a cross-domain request in this case. You may not need that, but I'm going to replace the content with this fixture, this Hacker News fixture. Let's come back into fixtures and pop open Hacker News. And these are the JSON results that I would like to return from this API. Now, the way I got this is I popped open my browser and I looked at the response from a regular thing and I just copied and pasted it. But I did modify it so that I have very specific details about this particular news story. I want this to be the first news story. And because I've now intercepted that call and replaced the results with this fixture, now when I go visit that site URL, now I know that I will get this particular set of results. So in this case, I did need to duplicate the cy.visit so that I could get the intercept in place. But once I've intercepted those results, I now can go look at the first post, and it should contain that title. This is a great way to mock out web responses for data that is more specific to this particular test. Now, these are end-to-end tests, and so I don't want to mock every server request. I want to mock requests where I'm testing particular behaviors that rely on specific data. But I still want to have tests that validate that all the data works as expected as well. So next, I'm going to say, should load stories. Let me go load the regular data, don't intercept it at all, and validate that I should have 30 stories on my list. Now that's an assumption. I assume that Hacker News has 30 stories, but they have enough stories that it's probably dozens of pages after that. So I think that's a decent assumption. Now, what if this request takes a long time? Right now, I'm just going to go look and see if I have it. And if the page hasn't loaded yet, if that service is slow, then I may not have 30 yet. I may still have my loading image. I could add an intercept here as well. Let me go wait for this particular request, and I'm going to name that as get stories. For the duration of this test now, I have a get stories thing that I can wait for. Okay, so let's cy.wait for @getStories. And now whenever this web request finishes, my test will pick up. I didn't have to wait a second. I didn't have to wait 2 or 3 seconds. Oh, that test timed out. Let's add another second to the wait. Nope, I just wait until this request is specifically done to continue on with the test. That's another really great mechanism of intercept. Now here in intercept, we are intercepting it to replace it with a fixture. Here in intercept, we are naming it so that we can wait for it. It's the same syntax for intercept, so I can get familiar with that and just run with it. But it's really cool being able to dig into both pieces. Okay, so I have this Hacker News PWA, and now I have these 3 tests. My first test should visit a page. It visits the page and validates that, oh, so it starts off and we have this loading screen. And then once that request comes in, now we have our results. Should have a specific top story. In this case, we canceled that load request in favor of the content that we got back from our fixture. So when we set that in place, here's the stories that we have. And in particular, here's the first story that we have selected so that we know that that value is as we expect. We're validating that we get that content and we're ready to go. In this next test, we're actually going to load the data from our regular API. So here it is. We've got our waiting screen and then it finished. And now I have 30 random stories from that API. In some cases, mocking our request is really helpful in being able to validate specific behaviors. In some cases, it gets in the way and we need to not do that. So we saw a really elegant way of being able to build up these tests to create great experiences of validating end-to-end that our web applications work as expected. One of the things that we saw was that it's really easy to get really long and complicated selectors. Better, let's create a div with a data-cy and now give it a unique name. Now, the beauty here is that not only are we describing this experience really well to our tests, but we're also documenting that this element, this attribute on this element, is specific for testing. As you're renaming CSS classes, as you're renaming IDs, you don't want to rename this test attribute because that's the piece that will make our tests sing. Then in the middle of our test, we'll say cy.get, and we'll go ask for that particular element. That's a little bit more durable than IDs or classes. But if you do have IDs or classes that don't change very often, that can be a really elegant solution as well, rather than long strings of CSS selectors. In this case, I didn't have control over those target applications, so those long CSS selectors were all I could do. But as you have control of both server and client, level up to IDs and classes, and if you need to, level up to these data-cy elements. The data-cy attribute documents the purpose and specifies your intent really well in communicating with your fellow developers. Another best practice, create commands for frequent tasks. We saw how when we wanted to create a new to-do, creating a small command made our test a lot more legible and made that functionality reusable. Whenever you're going to do a similar type of task, create a command, document it in TypeScript as well, and now leverage that command to make your tests a whole lot more reusable and legible. Here's the docs for building commands and that mechanism for documenting it inside TypeScript. Another best practice. In this application, we didn't have a login experience, but you don't want to do a login at the beginning of every test. That's probably slower than you want it to do. Instead, at the beginning of all tests, go hit an API and grab an authentication token. Save that authentication token and leverage it at the beginning of each test. Now that authentication token will get us through the authentication piece. And if we need to switch roles, maybe we need to hit a different API to get a different roles token. But that is a lot faster than flexing our login experience with every test. We do want a test to validate our login experience, but we only need one test to do that. We don't need every test to do that. use an API to post to our login experience, get back that token, and use that token in all of the tests to make your authenticated tests a lot faster. Here's the Cypress docs about doing exactly this. Another best practice. We saw how when we were loading stories, we couldn't control what data came back from the API. If you're writing tests on an API that doesn't exist yet, or on an API that might be unreliable, you can use fixtures to take control over those results. Now be careful with fixtures. It's really easy to completely lie to yourself and not discover that an API surface area has changed. So use fixtures to take control over the results when you're testing interactions and rendering of specific things. And then don't use fixtures to validate the complete end-to-end experience in some other tests. Here's the docs to cy.fixture as you grab these slides from robrich.org. Another best practice, we used, when we wanted to swap out the data with our fixture, we used cy.intercept to mock a server's response. Now that was really helpful in being able to take control of that result and do really interesting things. Mock the response when we need to be able to validate specific things about how our system will handle results. What will it do when we get a non-200? Let's reply with a 404 or a 503 and get a feel for how our app will behave in those scenarios and test that it behaves correctly. Then run a complete end-to-end system where we're actually flexing the interaction with the real API. Cypress is a really, really powerful tool for being able to do browser testing in concert with other test tools that we may use for validating our API, validating our components using unit tests, or just doing unit tests of our small service classes. Cypress can be a really, really fun tool for digging in. You can grab these slides on robrich.org and the code that we demoed today on robrich.org as well. If you're watching this session pre-recorded, tweet me at rob_rich and ask all the questions and give me great feedback. For those people who are live on the session today, what are your questions? I really appreciate the best practices. Great examples. Thank you. One of the questions I often get, should I choose Cypress or Selenium? Early on, we dug in and we saw how Selenium does have a whole lot more browser support. And so if one of your critical pieces is to ensure that you run through all of the browsers, Selenium might be a better choice. But Selenium tests have weights in them. It doesn't have that browser integration. So your Cypress tests will probably run a lot faster. If you can wait for Cypress to build support into the browsers that you need, or if Firefox, Chrome, and Edge are sufficient, I think Cypress might be a really great choice. Alternatively, Cypress tests are only written in JavaScript, and so if your team's skill is not in JavaScript, then Cypress may not be a great choice. Selenium offers you a whole lot more language options. To that end, you might want to look at Puppeteer or Playwright, because it has similar language options and abilities to dig in there. You will spend a lot of time marshaling things back and forth between your browser code and your test code, but that could be a really elegant mechanism for doing end-to-end testing in a browser, but without the limitations of needing to do it in JavaScript. Alternatively, your SPA was probably written in JavaScript, so the people who are building your front-end application are probably quite good at JavaScript. And as we saw in this example, you can also use Cypress with TypeScript to give you all the benefits of the type checking as well. What are my thoughts on the Cypress dashboard for CI integration? Yes, Cypress, as we saw it today, is a free tool, but they do have a paid tool as well that gives you a really elegant dashboard across tests, and it's really, really powerful. The decision to move from free to paid is not one to be taken lightly, but as you dig in, now you can start to upload your videos and get test experiences across all of the tests. Is that the dashboard that you were looking for, or were you looking more for getting coverage results and test passes into a dashboard like GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps? Actually, in anticipation of there, let's dig into how I might get this to happen inside of, in context with other tests. We talked about this plugins file where it launched off into the plugins that configured Cypress in interesting ways. But now how do we get our test results out of Cypress? Here I chose the JUnit reporter. JUnit is a pretty standard mechanism. It's an XML format. And I said, here's where I want that XML file to go. Now I chose to put it in the results folder, which is perfect. So now I can open up those results and I will get, let's go in there. Here's the results folder. And not only do I have the, inside that results folder, I'll have all of my JUnit test results, but I'll also have all of my videos and screenshots. So I have a couple of test runs here, but those are all of the JUnit results that I can start to integrate into context with my other unit test results, like my .NET results from my server or my Mocha results from my server. Have you found limitations in the Cypress should syntax? Yeah, I have found that it is a smidge awkward to deal with. I would rather just have straight chai to be able to do that, or just assertion syntax. But once I got familiar with it, it really wasn't that limiting. As long as I'm asking it very specific questions, like what is the length, or does it have this? If I get deeper into, does it have this class? Does it have, then I may need to form my get queries a little bit differently so that by the time I reach my assertion syntax, I'm not doing a whole lot of weird stuff in Cypress. Have you found limitations to your Cypress assertions, Ozgur?
Hi, Rob. No, I don't think I found any at the moment. Not used it heavily as much as I wanted to, but we use it for our front end stuff, and yep, it's been working really well for us at the moment. I was more wondering around, some of the limitations that you've mentioned around around browsers and how there's some development going on regarding Safari integration. I was wondering. I believe that Browser Stack started doing some integration with Cypress.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering maybe that solves some of the problems, some of the limitations that you've mentioned, but I'm not entirely sure at the moment.
And the benefit to Browser Stack is now you can parallelize all your tests as well. That's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In here in package.json, I did realize that I missed one piece. So now how do I run these from my CI server? I have a sci::run that just does a Cypress run, and that will run all of my tests on my chosen browsers. I also have a run Chrome, run Firefox, run Edge, where I'm specifically passing in headless and the particular browser that I want to run in. So then my test is npm run scirun Chrome and npm run scirun Firefox and scirun Edge. Oops. And npm run scirun Edge. And that will be able to get all my results. At that point, because I'm running it 3 different times, I'm getting the results from all 3 browsers, and I'm able to harvest that into my test results. Does Cypress with browser stack integration solve the browser limitation problems at all? I think so. And I think we talked through that a little bit. It is, browser stack will open lots of opportunities. That is cool. Do those tests work in GitHub Actions? Yes. The short version is yes. The medium version is, it depends, but I think GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps have paved over this quite a bit. We do need a TTY to be able to fire up browsers in this space. And so, for example, Chrome or Firefox does need to have some additional software installed. And so if you're in an environment, I think Circle CI has issues here, then you may need to start off your test by installing some packages that give you a virtual TTY that allows you to spin up browsers and have kind of interactions with those browsers. Even in a headless environment, I need a screen. The screen is just not shown to anybody. So environments that definitely don't have a screen, that's where you may run into issues. Cypress has done really well in documenting those things and getting them up to speed. And so in that case, in GitHub Actions, yeah, it works really well. This has been a lot of fun getting to present. Let's move over to Slack for continued questions. And I've had so much fun getting to join you here in London for a minute. Let's definitely continue the conversation. You can grab the slides and the code right now on robrich.org. Tweet me at rob_rich and see you in Slack. Thanks, everyone.